For more analysis on these latest comments from JPMorgan Chase Chairman and CEO Jamie Dimon, we're joined by Ian Bremmer, Eurasia Group founder and president. Ian, thanks so much for joining us again. Now, you heard that interview and you heard comments that Dimon recently saying this, quote, may be the most dangerous time the world has seen in decades. I imagine you agree with that assessment. What are we not paying enough attention to when it comes to geopolitical risk?
Well, I think we are now paying attention. And of course, when you do that, sometimes people get shell-shocked by the headlines, as opposed to remembering which of these things are going to be market moving and which of these aren't. And Jamie knows better than most that the role of the dollar in the global economy is the same as it was 25 years ago. And the role of the U.S. GDP in the global economy is about a quarter, just like it was when the Soviet Union collapsed. But it is precisely that strength and resilience of the U.S. that makes it easy for the United States to make really bad decisions and really inconsistent decisions and not show global leadership in ways that will hurt the world and in ways that will make other countries much less attractive for investment, ways that are hurting the Europeans, ways that are making life more uncertain in Asia, and certainly ways that are making the Middle East fall apart right now. So I'm very sympathetic to Jamie's perspective that there is a lot of uncertainty about whether the United States is going to be there consistently and strongly for allies going forward. In the last 3 weeks, in that regard, have been a horrible 3 weeks for U.S. allies all over the world, and frankly, been a very good 3 weeks for Iran, for Russia, for the rogues, even for North Korea. And nobody really wants that. Not me, not Jamie.
In this interim period of time where we've seen so much of the disarray play out in Washington, D.C., and that has even led to just not even being able to get funds through perhaps quickly enough in some cases with regard to some of the geopolitical tensions that we're talking about. We've often seen businesses in some instances stand in the gap on other issues, whether that be social issues or whether that be innovation and Washington catch up. Where do you imagine that business executives are perhaps doing their own either side deal making or even trying to quell fears of some of their allies, their partnerships that they have internationally, where there is perhaps some dismay on the government side in having clear talks, relations that play out calmly there?
When it comes to geopolitical conflict, companies are trying to keep their heads down. You do not want to be the CEO who is known for making the loudest, most impactful statements on Israel-Palestine. You will have your head chopped off by half of your constituents, whether they are shareholders or customers or your workers. And we've seen that happen to a few CEOs, but most of them are holding fire. The same thing, it's a lot easier on Russia-Ukraine because the entire world was on the Ukrainian side. But that's becoming more challenging, of course, because the U.S. is increasingly making Russia-Ukraine into a partisan issue, whether or not there should be further support for it. And that is undermining, the perspective of those around the world that are saying, wait a second, like we're not sure if we're going to be able to continue to lead this fight. So on both of these, unlike, we can talk about climate change, we can talk about new technologies and the rest, but on geopolitics, the role for the CEO in the public debate is de minimis.
Ian, so one of the things that stood out to me that Dimon said about what's going on, like when you think about the war between Israel and Hamas and the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, the challenges of safety, the impact to democracy long term. What is the role of the U.S., especially when you think about the war between Israel and Hamas? What does the U.S. need to be doing to shore up the global economic stability?
Global economic stability, the United States has to not just display power, but has to display credibility. And that is the challenge. I mean, reading between the lines, Jamie didn't say it directly, but he was nudging you there. He's like, the United States lacks credibility. He said, we can be the ugly American. We sometimes get in our own way. I mean, you boil that all down, it's something I've been talking about for a few years now, which is that when the wall came down, countries around the world actually really respected American values. They believed the United States stood for something that they wanted to stand for. They wanted their political system to run more like the American political system. Now, fast forward 30 years, and you see all of this conflict and confrontation around the world. Why isn't the United States seen as that kind of a leader? And a big part of that reason, I would say a fundamental part, is that Americans increasingly don't know what their country stands for. Americans increasingly don't believe in their own political leaders and their media leaders and their corporate leaders and their finance leaders. There's the divisions inside the United States. Democracy globally is not broken. There are plenty of democracies around the world that are showing that they can work extremely well. I'd point to Japan. I'd point to Germany, the Nordics, plenty of countries. But the United States happens to be the world's largest democracy. It's the world's most powerful. I mean, largest in terms of GDP, right? Not in terms of number of people. And it's also the one that is the most uncertain, the most dysfunctional, and the one that is most divided. And that doesn't. The funny thing is that doesn't have much impact on the United States economically, but it has huge impact on the rest of the world.
Right. Ian, just lastly, while we have you here, what comes to light with regard to so much of the conflict as it plays out is where there are entanglements economically and what countries are specifically in partnership with other countries for some economic reason or another. And on the other side of that, too, you have an era of deglobalization that we've been in for the past few years here. And so with that in mind, on the other side of the conflict that has played out, whether that be Russia-Ukraine, whether that now be Israel-Hamas, how do we get back towards a pathway of reglobalization?
Well, we've talked about de-risking now with the United States and China for a couple of years. That's the term of art. Like if you have all this confrontation and uncertainty, then you want less exposure globally to the Chinese market and to the volatility and uncertainty that comes from that country and that relationship. Well, de-risking is not just about U.S.-China. De-risking is about the Middle East. De-risking is about Russia, Ukraine. De-risking is about all of this geopolitics. So as the geopolitical conflicts become greater, as we're in a G0 world, as I call it, not a G7, not a G20, but an absence of global leadership, you're going to see more de-risking. You're going to see people much less comfortable about just-in-time global supply chains because that only works when the geopolitics don't matter. Final point, we had the pandemic for 2-3 years, and a lot of people thought, okay, well, we have to move away from global supply chains because literally you can't move goods and people from place to place. Fundamentally, this is much more about the geopolitical recession we're in than about a 2 or 3 year pandemic that we're largely out of.
All right. Thank you so much, Ian Bremmer. Always great insight from you on the global landscape. Eurasia Group founder and president, Ian Bremmer.